push back and to come back to this idea that we're talking about. I do believe that people have beliefs and thoughts that are heretical, like a lot of people. I wonder what fraction of people have that. To me, this is the preference falsification is really interesting. What is the landscape of ideas that human civilization has in private as compared to what's out in public? Because like that, the dynamical system that is the difference between those two is fascinating. Like there's throughout history, the fall of communism and multiple regimes throughout Europe is really interesting because everybody was following, the line until not. Right. But you better, for sure, privately, there was a huge number of boiling conversations happening where like the bureaucracy of communism, the corruption of communism, all of that was really bothering people more and more and more and more. And all of a sudden, there's a trigger that allows the vibe shift to happen. So to me, like the interesting question here is, what is the landscape of private thoughts and ideas and conversations that are happening under the surface of Americans? Especially, my question is, how much dormant energy is there for this roaring 20s where people are like, no more bullshit, let's get shit done?
Yeah. So we'll go through the theory of preference falsification.
Yes, just by the way, amazing. The books on this is fascinating.
Yeah. So this is one of the all-time great books. Incredible. It's about 30-year-old book, but it's completely modern and current in what it talks about, as well as very deeply historically informed. So it's called Private Truths, Public Lies, and it's written by a social science professor named Timur Kuran at, I think, Duke. And it's definitive work on this. And so he has this concept he calls preference falsification. And so preference falsification is two things. Preference falsification, and you get it from the title of the book, Private Truths, Public Lies. So preference falsification is when you believe something and you can't say it. Or, and this is very important, you don't believe something and you must say it. Right? And the commonality there is in both cases you're lying. You believe something internally and then you're lying about it in public. And so the thing, and there's sort of the two classic forms of it. There's for example, there's the I believe communism is rotten, but I can't say it version of it. But then there's also the famous parable of the real life example, but the thing that Václav Havel talks about in the other good book on this topic, which is The Power of the Powerless. Who was an anti-communist resistance fighter who ultimately became the president of Czechoslovakia after the fall of the wall. But he wrote this book, and he describes the other side of this, which is workers of the world unite, right? And so he describes what he calls the parable of the greengrocer, which is you're a greengrocer in Prague in 1985, and for the last 70 years, 50 years, it's been absolutely mandatory to have a sign in the window of your store that says workers of the world unite, right? And it's 1985. It is like crystal clear that the workers of the world are not going to unite. Like, like of all the things that could happen in the world, that is not going to happen. The commies have been at that for 70 years. It is not happening. But that slogan had better be in your window every morning, because if it's not in your window every morning, you are not a good communist. The secret police are going to come by and they're going to get you. And so the first thing you do when you get to the store is you put that slogan in the window and you make sure that it stays in the window all day long. But he says the thing is, every single person, the greengrocer knows the slogan is fake. He knows it's a lie. Every single person walking past the slogan knows that it's a lie. Every single person walking past the store knows that the greengrocer is only putting it up there because he has to lie in public. And the greengrocer has to go through the humiliation of knowing that everybody knows that he's caving into the system and lying in public. And so it turns into demoralization campaign. It's not just ideological enforcement. In fact, it's not ideological enforcement anymore because everybody knows it's fake. The authorities know it's fake. Everybody knows it's fake. It's not that they're enforcing the actual ideology of the world's workers of the world uniting. It's that they are enforcing compliance, right? And compliance with the regime. And fuck you, you will comply, right? And so anyway, that's the other side of that. And of course, we have lived in the last decade through a lot of both of those. I think anybody listening to this could name a series of slogans that we've all been forced to chant for the last decade that everybody knows at this point are just like simply not true. I'll let the audience, speculate on those on their own group chats.
Send Mark your memes online as well, please.
Yes, exactly. But okay, so anyway, so it's the two sides of that, right? So it's private truths, public lies. So then what preference falsification does is it talks about extending that from the idea of the individual experiencing that to the idea of the entire society experiencing that, right? And this gets to your percentages question, which is like, okay, what happens in a society in which people are forced to lie in public about what they truly believe? What happens, number one, is that individually they're lying in public, and that's bad. But the other thing that happens is they no longer have an accurate gauge at all or any way to estimate how many people agree with them. And this is how you, and again, this literally is like how you get something like the communist system, which is like, okay, you end up in a situation in which 80 or 90 or 99% of a society can actually all be thinking individually, I really don't buy this anymore. And if anybody would just stand up and say it, I would be willing to go along with it, but I'm not going to be the first one to put my head on the chopping block. But you have because of the suppression, censorship, you have no way of knowing how many other people agree with you. And if the people who agree with you are 10% of the population and you become part of a movement, you're going to get killed. If 90% of the people agree with you, you're going to win the revolution, right? And so the question of like what the percentage actually is like a really critical question. And then basically in any sort of authoritarian system, you can't like run a survey, right, to get an accurate result. And so you actually can't know until you put it to the test. And then what he describes in the book is it's always put to the test in the same way. And this is exactly what's happened for the last 2 years, like 100% of exactly what's happened. It's like straight out of this book, which is somebody, Elon, sticks his hand up and says, the workers of the world are not going to unite.
Yep.
Right? Or the emperor is actually wearing no clothes, right? You know, that famous parable, right? So one person stands up and does it. And literally that person is standing there by themselves and everybody else in the audience is like, ooh, I wonder what's going to happen to that guy. Right? But again, nobody knows. Elon doesn't know. The first guy doesn't know. Other people don't know, like, which way is this going to go? And it may be that that's a minority position and that's a way to get yourself killed. Or it may be that that's the majority position and you are now the leader of a revolution. And then basically, of course, what happens is, okay, the first guy does that, doesn't get killed. The second guy does, well, a lot of the time that guy does get killed. But when the guy doesn't get killed, then a second guy pops his head up, says the same thing. All right, now you've got 2 leads to 4 leads to 8 leads to 16. And then as we saw with the fall of the Berlin Wall, this is what happened in Russia and Eastern Europe in 89. When it goes, it can go, right? And then it rips. And then what happens is very, very quickly, if it turns out that you had a large percentage of the population that actually believed a different thing, it turns out all of a sudden everybody has this giant epiphany that says, oh, I'm actually part of the majority. And at that point, like you are on the freight train to revolution, right? Like it is rolling, right? Now, the other part of this is the distinction between the role of the elites and the masses. And here the best book is called The True Believer, which is the Eric Hoffer book. And so the nuance you have to put on this is the elites play a giant role in this because the elites do idea formation and communication. But the elites, by definition, are a small minority. And so there's also this giant role played by the masses. And the masses are not necessarily thinking these things through in the same intellectualized, formal way that the elites are. But they are for sure experiencing these things in their daily lives. And they for sure have at least very strong emotional views on them. And so when you really get the revolution, it's when you get the elites lined up with, or a new, either the current elites change or the new set of elites, a new set of counter elites basically come along and say, no, there's actually a different and better way to live. And then the people basically decide to follow the counter elite. So that's the other dimension to it. And of course, that part is also happening right now. And again, case study number one of that would be Elon and his, it turns out, truly massive following.
And he has done that over and over in different industries, not just saying crazy shit online, but saying crazy shit in the realm of space, in the realm of autonomous driving, in the realm of AI, just over and over and over again. Turns out saying crazy shit is one of the ways to do a revolution and to actually make progress.
Yeah, and it's like, well, but then there's the test: is it crazy shit or is it the truth?
Yeah.
Right. And this is where, there are many specific things about Elon's genius, but one of the really core ones is an absolute dedication to the truth. And so when Elon says something, it sounds like crazy shit, but in his mind, it's true. Now, is he always right? No. Sometimes the rockets crash. Like, sometimes he's wrong. He's human. He's like anybody else. He's not right all the time. But at least my through line with him, both in what he says in public and what he says in private, which, by the way, are the exact same things. He does not do this. He doesn't lie in public about what he believes in private, or at least he doesn't do that anymore. Like he's 100% consistent in my experience. By the way, there's 2 guys who are 100% consistent like that I know, Elon and Trump.
Yeah.
Whatever you think of them,
yeah,
what they say in private is 100% identical to what they say in public. Like they are completely transparent. They're completely honest in that way. Right. Which is like, and again, it's not like they're perfect people, but they're honest in that way. And it makes them potentially both, as they have been, very powerful leaders of these movements, because they're both willing to stand up and say the thing that, if it's true, it turns out to be the thing in many cases that, many or most or almost everyone else actually believes, but nobody was actually willing to say out loud. And so that they can actually catalyze these shifts. And I think this framework is exactly why Trump took over the Republican Party, is I think Trump stood up there on stage with all these other kind of conventional Republicans, and he started saying things out loud that it turned out the base really was, they were either already believing or they were prone to believe. And he was the only one who was saying them. And so again, elite masses, he was elite. The voters are the masses, and the voters decided, no, no more Bushes. Like, we're going this other direction. That's the mechanism of social change. Like what we just described is like the actual mechanism of social change. It is fascinating to me that we have been living through exactly this. We've been living through everything exactly what Timur Kuran describes, everything that Václav Havel described. We've been living, black squares on Instagram, like the whole thing. Right, all of it, and we've been living through the true believer elites masses, thing with a set of like basically incredibly corrupt elites wondering why they don't have the loyalty of the masses anymore, and a set of new elites that are running away with things. And so, like, we're living through this like incredible applied case study of these ideas, and if there's a moral of the story, it is I think fairly obvious, which is it's a really bad idea for a society to wedge itself into a position in which most people don't believe the fundamental precepts of what they're told they have to do, to be good people. Like that is just not a good state to be in.
So one of the ways to avoid that in the future maybe is to keep the delta between what's said in private and what's said in public small.
Yeah, it's like, well, this is sort of the siren song of censorship, is we can keep people from saying things, which means we can keep people from thinking things.
Yeah.
And, by the way, that may work for a while, right? Like, I mean, again, the hard form of the Soviet Union, owning a mimeograph, pre-photocopiers, there were mimeograph machines that were used to make samizdat and underground newspapers, which is the mechanism of written communication of radical ideas, heretical ideas. Ownership of a mimeograph machine was punishable by death. Right. So that's the hard version, right? The soft version is somebody clicks a button in Washington and you are erased from the internet. Right. Like, which, good news, you're still alive. Bad news is, shame about not being able to get a job. Too bad your family now, hates you and won't talk to you, but whatever the version of cancellation has been. And so like, does that work? Like, maybe it works for a while. Like, it worked for the Soviet Union for a while, in its way, especially when it was coupled with, official state power. But when it unwinds, it can unwind with like incredible speed and ferocity, because to your point, there's all this bottled up energy. Now, your question was like, what are the percentages? Like, what's the breakdown? And so my rough guess, just based on what I've seen in my world, is it's something like 20, 60, 20. It's like you've got 20% like true believers in whatever is, the current thing. You get 20% of people who are just like true believers of whatever they're whatever's in like I said, whatever's in the New York Times, Harvard professors, and the Ford Foundation, like they're just believing. And by the way, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 5, but let's say generously it's 20. So 20% kind of full on revolutionaries. And then you've got, let's call it 20% on the other side that are like, no, I'm not on board with this. This is crazy. I'm not signing up for this. But their view of themselves is they're in a small minority, and in fact, they start out in a small minority because what happens is the 60% go with the first 20%, not the second 20%. So you've got this large middle of people, and it's not that there's anything like, it's not that people in the middle are not smart or anything like that. It's that they just have like normal lives. And they're just trying to get by, and they're just trying to go to work each day and do a good job and be a good person and raise their kids and, have a little bit of time to watch the game. And they're just not engaged in the cut and thrust of, political activism or any of this stuff. It's just not their thing. But that's where the over socialization comes in. It's just like, okay, by default, the 60% will go along with the 20% of the radical revolutionaries, at least for a while. And then the counter elite is in this other 20%. And over time, they build up a theory and network and ability to resist, and a new set of representatives and a new set of ideas. And then at some point, there's a contest. And then the question is, what happens in the middle? What happens in the 60%? And it's kind of my point. It's not even really does the 60% change their beliefs as much as it's like, okay, what is the thing that 60% now decides to basically fall into step with? And I think that 60% in the Valley, that 60% for the last decade decided to be woke, and extremely, I would say, on edge on a lot of things. And that 60% is pivoting in real time. They're just done. They've just had it.
And I would love to see where that pivot goes, because there's internal battles happening right now, right?
So this is the other thing. Okay, so there's two forms of things that, and Timur has actually talked about this. Professor Kuran has talked about this. So one is, he said this is the kind of unwind where what you're going to have is you're now going to have people in the other direction. You're going to have people who claim that they supported Trump all along who actually didn't. Right. So it's going to swing the other way. And by the way, Trump's not the only part of this, but he's just a convenient shorthand for a lot of this. But whatever it is, you'll have people who will say, well, I never supported DEI, right? Or I never supported ESG, or I never thought we should have canceled that person, right? Where of course they were full on a part of the mob, like, kind of at that moment. And so anyway, so you'll have preference falsification happening in the other direction. And his prediction, I think, basically is you'll end up with the same quote problem on the other side. Now, will that happen here? I don't know. How far is American society willing to go on any of these things? I don't know. But like there is some question there. And then the other part of it is, okay, now you have this, elite that is used to being in power for the last decade. And by the way, many of those people are still in power and they're in very, important positions. And the New York Times is still the New York Times and Harvard is still Harvard. And like those people haven't changed like at all. Right. And they still, they've been bureaucrats in the government and, senior Democratic, politicians and so forth. And they're sitting there, right now feeling like reality has just smacked them hard in the face because they lost the election so badly. But they're now going into and specifically the Democratic Party is going into a civil war, right? And that form of the civil war is completely predictable, and that's exactly what's happening, which is half of them are saying we need to go back to the center, we need to de-radicalize because we've lost the people, we've lost the people in the middle, and so we need to go back to the middle in order to be able to get 50% plus one in an election. Right. And then the other half of them are saying, no, we weren't true to our principles. We were too weak. We were too soft. We must become more revolutionary. We must double down and we must, celebrate, murders in the street of health insurance executives. And that right now is like a real fight.